Welcome, everyone, to another amazing episode of the one and only Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. Today, we have a super cool episode. We're actually going to be talking about a lot of the new products that just got released at ICAST. Now, if you don't know what the heck ICAST is, don't worry. We're going to explain everything. Joining me today, of course, is the man with the mustache and the beard, Andrew. How are you doing,
Hey,
man?
I'm doing all right.
Awesome.
Those of you watching, I'm wearing my Sunday best.
If you didn't know what Andrew's Sunday best is, it's basically a SpongeBob Hawaiian shirt with a bunch of coconuts on it. I approve.
Yes.
So this episode is going to be pretty cool. We love fishing tackle and we love new fishing tackle. We're not saying you need any of this stuff, but we're going to talk about some cool stuff that is going to be coming out shortly or in, 2025 coming up. But before we get into this really cool topic, we're going to have an interesting fishing fact. And to handle that, we have, like I mentioned, Andrew.
So, talking about, and we're going to be talking about ICAST, talking about the new releases, and that made me think of what's one of the oldest releases in fishing. I'm talking about the hook itself. Now,
Ah.
I'm going to introduce this like a really sea level documentary thriller movie, but it's kind of get us rolling into what we're expected to find out now about hooks. In a world before Mustad, VMC, and Eagle Claw, where fishing was more luck than skill, discover how ancient anglers turned bones into the ultimate fishing bling. See how hooks went from caveman crude to high tech sharp. Let's look and see how the hook changed the world. And
Wow.
you can either edit that out or just edit some really epic music behind it so I sound cool for once in my life. But talking about different hooks, I was doing a lot of research, and hooks have been around for thousands of years. Like, it's super old. One thing I learned right off the bat was the original term for hook, in like ye old English and old Germanic, is actually angle, which makes sense that the term angling exists now. I'm like, okay, made that correlation. Because fishing is often done with nets and things like that. So to angle, or to use an angle to catch fish, is to use a hook. Now, some of the earliest versions, some consider them hooks, some don't, is called the actual gorge. I don't know if you've seen that before, Jesse. It's a small pointed stick. It's got like a point on each end. You tie your line in the middle of it, and then you pack your bait around it, or you tie it beside your bait. So when a fish swallows it, and then you tug on that rope, it then turns that pointed stick sideways, perpendicular, it gets caught in the fish's gullet, and you can land the fish. Now, there were hooks, as we traditionally think of them, like a hook shape with a point. Barbs came about fairly early on in the hook's life, but the earliest hooks did not have barbs. Some of the oldest hooks they ever found were in Okinawa Island in Japan. They were made from sea snail shells. Now, hooks have been found all over the world, in Mexico and New Zealand, from like years and years and years ago, often made from snail shells, just due to the shape, and they could sharpen it down to a nice point. Uh, they have been made from a bunch of different things: animal, human bones, horns, antlers, stone, copper, bronze, iron, bird beaks. Like, there's so many different materials they've made hooks from. In fact, up until the 1900s, they even made wooden hooks, or they were called steam bent hooks. And they would take a U branch and then steam it, and then they'd create a bend in it, and that bend would stay there. And the cool thing about using wood for a hook is that hook floats.
Hmm.
It's kind of genius to me. Like, now, yes, we have floating jig heads, but they're kind of unwieldy. But the hook itself is floating. We need to recreate this, but with like hollow nanotechnology steel or something. Jesse's keeps promising me he's working on his nanotechnology to make fishing better, but I'm still waiting to see results, Jesse.
Yeah. I'm not Tony Stark. What do you expect?
Jesse Jesse built us in a cave with a box of scraps. Now, one of the cool things about hooks is the developments with hooks is they started using multiple materials in the hook to create a better product. So, for example, wood was great for like the shank of it, but then other materials could be used for the point. So, for example, they used wood hooks with flint tips that could stay sharper. Another thing was another popular hook. This is actually found in Florida. From years ago, it was actually made out of antler and baculum. Do you know what baculum is, Jesse?
It's it's raccoon pecker.
How did you know that?
I'll tell you why. Someone actually sent this to me the other day. It was iCatch Dinks. He's like, "Hey, did you know they used to make hooks from deer antler and raccoon pecker bits?" And I was like, "No."
So I did, as true Andrew fashion is, I did a bunch of weird research into hooks because of that post. So, first of all, I want to thank iCatch Dinks for sending me that, because it did send me down a rabbit hole. Thankfully, I didn't find anything weirder than using the bone that's found inside of a raccoon penis as the point of the hook. What I did find out about baculum, though, is people wear it as jewelry because they consider it good luck. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not something I want to start adorning my body with. But another thing I never really thought of was when you think of a hook, like you picture, I'm sure Jesse, you picture the same thing that I did, like a point with a barb maybe, has a nice curve in the bottom, it has that long shank, and then the hook eye. Now we consider, like we call it a hook eye. For a long time, people used what were called blind hooks, meaning it didn't have an eyelet at the top. They would often have like a tapered edge or something like that, so they could do similar to like a snell knot or something like that, and they would just tie their line to the shank of the hook. You can still get these. They're more popular in some other areas of the world still, but personally, I've never gone into a local tackle store and been able to find some blind hooks. I'm sure they're around, but I've personally never seen them. But it kind of surprised me that Egyptians, like ancient Egyptians, actually had eyelets on their hooks. They've fallen out of fashion for thousands of years. The eyelets and hooks was kind of reinvented in the 1600s, but didn't gain popularity until the 1800s and 1900s is when it actually started becoming more popular to actually have an eyelet on your hook. And to me, like that's something we take for granted, as yes, of course, hooks have a little loop at the end so you can tie your line to or attach it to a split ring or to your bait. But the fact that there were so many years where that was just like, even when it was invented, people were like, you don't need that. Who cares? But I was going to challenge Jesse here. How many different types of hooks can you think of? Like if you talk about different brands, I'll give you a couple examples. So we have like a straight shank, you have a wide gap, extra wide gap. What are some other types of hooks that you can think
of? Circle hook.
Yep.
Siwash hook.
Yep.
Bait holder hook.
Yep.
Stinger hook.
Yep. That's one.
Aberdeen.
Aberdeen, yes, good.
Yeah,
that's a long good
shank.
pull.
Yeah, that's a good one. There's so many. Beak hook.
I'll list through. Now, this is not a comprehensive list at all, but these are some of the most popular hook styles we have today. We have the bait hook, like Jesse mentioned, a jig style hook, wide gap, extra wide gap, weedless wide gap, a J hook, Aberdeen, Siwash, straight shank, a keel fly, circle hook, a worm hook, octopus hook, sickle hook, a double hook, a treble hook, which is very popular. And those are just like the main things that people use. That doesn't include all your different weighted hooks, all your different versions of hooks that have special bait keepers on them, like all kinds of different things. So we're really spoiled rotten when it comes to what hooks we have available to use on our baits. Even down to the finish on it, if they're coated with anything special to make them slippery, how it's sharpened either chemically or mechanically. And there's so much stuff that guys 100 years ago did not have access to, like the eye of a hook. Or something that didn't include, animal remnants of reproductive organs. Now, what I could not find, and I'm really disappointed that I couldn't find this. This is a challenge not a challenge, but an opportunity. If any of our listeners know the answer to this, please let me know. I was trying to find the origin for the hook sizes because, like Jesse and I, we've been fishing long enough, we understood it, but for a long time, hook sizing was very confusing to me. So for those of you who don't know, the smallest hook you can get is, now there's different charts and different ways of measuring hooks, but in North America, traditionally we have a 30, number 32 is the smallest size, and go up to a 1 is one of the larger size hooks. So from 32 to 1, it actually gets bigger the smaller the number. Then you have, it skips 0 completely, and then you have 0 -1, 0 -2, or we call it a 1-odd, or a 2-odd, or a 3-odd. Then, the bigger the number gets, the bigger the hook gets. Now, I don't know why. Why did they start randomly at this was hook number 1, and then we'll make smaller ones and make the number bigger? And then what happened? Like 50 years later, they decided we need bigger hooks. Well, we started here. We can't change it. Like, I don't know. I don't know what happened. It's confusing. I didn't invent it, and I apologize for anyone getting into fishing, trying to learn that to know what size hook to use. It can be confusing. But number 32 hook is the smallest hook that is sold today. Now, for those of you who can't visualize the size of it, if you are from Canada, pull out a nickel. A number 32 hook is about the size of the tail on the beaver.
Wow.
If you are from America, pull out a quarter, and a number 32 hook is about the size of George Washington's nose. Like, that's how small these hooks are. Like, these hooks are. And they're used for traditionally fly tying, and they'll make like gnat flies and put it on these things. Like, that's such a small bait. On the other end of the spectrum, they do have up to a size 30 circle hook that is made, and it's an anchor. It's ridiculous. But usually they say the largest hook you can actually purchase that's fishable is a 19-aught. Now, I don't have anything for size reference because this one's large enough. I can just give you measurements of it. You'll understand the scale. It's 14 inches long. And the actual wire that the hook is made from is over half an inch thick. So
it's for like sharks, maybe.
That's for the world's biggest sharks, I'm sure. So I just thought it was interesting to have like the spectrum of something so small I would never use, and something so big I would never use it. But for some reason they exist. So if you ever used either of those hooks, please write us in, let us know, and hopefully you weren't snagging salmon with the latter.
You chuck that in the water, every salmon would spook within a mile. Probably weighs like 4 pounds. It's crazy,
I can't
though.
imagine the weight.
You'll see like some of those big circle hooks they use for shark fishing, and they're legit, the size of a dinner plate, huge.
They're huge. Like,
and then they attach it with like literal chain. Yeah, yeah. We'll have to do saltwater shark fishing one day, Andrew. Interesting fishing fact, Andrew. Andrew's bringing it back with a little bit of hook history, HH, in case you're interested. And we'll do another one on the interesting history of lead sinkers one day. So anyway, this episode is going to be pretty cool. Every single year, new fishing stuff comes out. And every single year, a bunch of dumb fishermen buy it. Every single year. The fishing industry is massive. And I'm not going to say that most of the stuff you need. You don't. New stuff is just cool. There is some innovation, a lot of copies from older stuff that has, been around for many decades in many cases. But it is always cool, especially if you're, someone that's really into fishing, to see the new stuff coming out. Some of the stuff caught our eye. Some of it was meh. So we're going to kind of talk about some of the stuff that, is a little bit exciting for us, and hopefully it is for you guys too. We kind of left out anything really high end. Like, we're not going to be talking about live scope, bass boats, high end kayaks, nothing like that. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, believe me, there was a lot of really cool releases for kayak fishing, for new technology, for really cool, like a new trolling motor for kayaks that is very powerful. Maybe we'll talk about that in another interesting fishing fact in a few weeks. But we're going to talk about mostly some baits, some rods, some lines, some terminal tackle, stuff like that. Stuff that the average angler might be interested in, all the way from budget all the way up to semi-bougie. So I thought we could just go randomly. We're not going to, go all reels and all rods. I thought we could just go randomly. But first of all, what is ICAST? Now, if you're listening to this, do you know what ICAST stands for? Does it mean ICAST? Like what? What does it mean? No, it doesn't. What does it stand for, Andrew? I had to look this up. I had no idea.
Yeah, I had to read what Jesse wrote for me. It stands for International Convention of Allied Sport Fishing Trades.
Yeah. So it's a huge show every summer. It's usually in Florida. I'm pretty sure it's usually always in Florida. And we kind of focus on the freshwater part of it because, we're from Ontario. We like that. But you go to ICAST, there's all kinds of fishing stuff from all like, saltwater, freshwater, fly fishing, kayak, clothing, anything related to fishing in general. They have it. It would actually be awesome to go to this event one day, but I'm not going to drive all the way to Florida to look at fishing stuff I can't afford.
I was just going to say that, like, going back to the name, ICAST is definitely something they figured out the acronym for and then discovered what it meant.
Yes, it's true. And don't get all annoyed that you can't get to ICAST every year, because right here in Ontario we have CanCast, which is, in my opinion, it's not as big as ICAST. ICAST is a beast of a show, but CanCast is, you're not going to be dissatisfied going to that. There is so much new stuff you see every year, every April. Kyle Crothers and his crew, they have the biggest fishing show in Canada in Peterborough. So definitely check that out. Again, we love that show. It's been more than a few years in a row we've went, but we're going to talk about ICAST today. So I thought we could just go through some of the show winners. They go through all these hundreds and hundreds of products and they choose some winners. So we're going to talk about a few of them, and we're going to try our best, because this is a podcast, to describe what these things are, what they look like, all that kind of stuff. But we'll put a bunch of links in the show notes below for some of our favorite items so you can check them out. So actually the best freshwater rod. Now think of this. You're going to ICAST. There are probably dozens of rod manufacturers there. Dozens. And I'm talking like super high-end rods are there, entry-level stuff. Who wins best of show for best freshwater rod? Now, this is a rod that a lot of people will insult, but I almost guarantee 95% of you owned one of these or still use one. And that's the Ugly Stick. Ugly Stick has redesigned the Ugly Stick GX2 spinning and casting rods. They look a little bit more refreshed. Very similar rod, but they have done some upgrades to them. They actually won best of show. And actually, funny story, I was actually fishing with my nephew last weekend. We were fishing just for catfish and carp down at one of the river mills. And I was like, I normally have my carp rods with bait feeders and all that stuff. But what I did is I just grabbed my Ugly Stick, which I have a 6'6" medium Ugly Stick. We went out, had a heck of a time, caught a bunch of catfish. Ugly Sticks are just great rods. Like, have you ever had one, Andrew? I think you're the one guy that's never had one.
Yeah, I've never had one, purely because back in the day, Jess and I, we used, like we mentioned before, we used to call each other on Wednesday night, talk about the new Bass Pro Shops catalog, and just go through page by page and just talk about the different stuff.
Yeah.
We didn't have any other friends, but it was something that, growing up, there's kind of stigma of Ugly Stick is like the Canadian tire rod. It's junk. It's cheap. I want to get something that's a bit better. Now, being a bit older and maybe wiser, I would say that Ugly Stick, it definitely has its place. There's so many things you don't need, high-end sensitivity for. And for most of the fishing that people are doing in Ontario, you don't need high sensitivity for. I don't mean people fishing Ontario in the pro circuit, but people going to their cottage and casting whatever. You don't need anything more than just something that flexes,
Yeah.
So the Ugly Stick is an awesome option for that because it fits most people's budgets, and it obviously, it doesn't break easy, which is fantastic. So it lasts years. So it is something that really should be in my repertoire.
Yeah. I actually have two of them. I have a 6'6" medium and I have a 5'6" light. Which my nephew uses for panfish and stuff like that. But they're great rods. I'm sure, like I said, tons of people own them. When I worked at the tackle shop, we sold so many of those I couldn't even remember. They are just great rods and they're basically indestructible. So if you're looking for a really indestructible rod for either, an inexperienced angler or a child, and you don't want to worry about them, breaking the thing, these things are indestructible and they can catch big fish. Like, we've caught giant carp on like a 6'6" medium Ugly Stick, and that thing's never going to break. Literally, your line or your reel will fall apart before that rod breaks. So good for them for redesigning that rod. Again, it's a top selling rod for a reason, and I think they're like $60, 60, $70 now. They've gone up a little bit in price over the years, but it's a rod that you buy and you're going to have for years. I think the ugly stick that I actually got it from a buddy who had it for years, and he moved away, and I was like, oh, I'll take it because he was just going to get rid of it. And the thing's like old. It's like an OG ugly stick, and it's still fine. It's pure fiberglass. Nothing's ever going to happen to it. So best freshwater reel, we got the Shimano Vanford that got updated. We're going to talk about these a little bit more. Yeah, it looks real good. Best freshwater hard lure. This lure hasn't, it's not like a new release. It actually came out last year. Andrew actually bought one, and that's the Berkeley Kredge, which, if you're not aware, what is it, the Kredge, Andrew?
So the Kredge is a jerkbait spelled backwards. It's the Kredge. And
Genius.
Its purpose is for forward-facing sonar is what it was intended for. Now, for someone who doesn't own forward-facing sonar, you might think, why did Andrew buy it? It's because I'm dumb. But it has other features for it. So as you jerk it forward, it'll settle and it shimmies a really good shimmy down and kind of slopes backwards. So you can fish it in weeds, kind of like a suic, except on the pole it'll actually rise up and then it sinks back. It pulls up and sinks back. You can also slow retrieve it right in the surface, and it's like a little like walking bait right in the surface. There are other ways to fish it effectively in a very variety of different zones. If you know the structure you're fishing on, you don't need live scope to kind of fish that area effectively with the Kredge. So it does have, it's something new. That's why I got it. It's something new, different. You fish it completely differently. And I like trying weird things. So I think I've caught one bass on it so far, but I didn't really fish it much. I got it this spring only, so I didn't fish much so far this year.
Yeah. Interesting lure, and I know a lot of people are saying that it's a knockoff of the Jackal riser. It's not. It's a different bait. The Jackal is a topwater bait that you retrieve on the topwater, and it has like a really cool. Too. We have it too.
Yeah.
But the Kredge is a different bait. It's for different technique. Some people, I think, when new baits come out, they always think, oh, they're copying this or they're copying that. Oftentimes that is the case. Other times, open your mind to realize that things are actually different before you start, accusing people. But anyway, that's
maybe
a cool bait.
Maybe it is similar to something else, but maybe they improved on something, and the bait is different enough now to have a benefit.
For sure. So I thought now we could just kind of go through some of the new products that caught our eye the most. Some of these are going to be from budget to, like I said, mid-price bougie. So the first one I thought, which was pretty exciting, was the new Shimano Vanford. Now, if you're familiar with Shimano, the CI4, the Stratic CI4 was a huge popular selling reel back in the day. For many years, it was like the Stratic was the heavy duty reel. The CI4 was the lightweight finesse version of that. What happened in 2020 is they replaced the Stratic CI4 with the Vanford, which sounds kind of like a preppy college. It's like, oh, my kid goes to Vanford.
It sounds like a 1985 like camper van to compete against the Vandura, but it's made by Ford.
Yeah, so in 2020 they released the Vanford, and I've picked that thing up so many times, and I've wanted to buy it. I have a few buddies that own them. They're fantastic reels. They're super lightweight. So the Stratic, me and Andrew both have. I have a few of them. They're fantastic reels. They're aluminum frame, heavy duty, a little on the heavier side. And then the Vanford is like the CI4 version, which it has, carbon fiber. So it's very, very light. So these reels are very, very light. Like instead of a reel weighing, say like 9.5 ounces, these weigh like 6.5 ounces. They're very light. So what's new with the new Vanford? So again, the old one was only out for 3 years. The new one is the Vanford FA. It's the new version. So what they did was, Shimano often does this. So does Daiwa. It's trickle down, right? So they have their flagship spinning reel, the Stella. You've probably heard of the Stella. Have you seen it in the fishing store and you look and it's like $1,200 or $1,300?
I look at it and like, I can't afford it, and I just look up to the sky and yell, Stella!
I've played around with them a few times. They're amazing reels. I would not personally spend that much on a reel. Many people have. So what happens with this technology is they have all these cool technologies in these super expensive reels, and eventually it trickles down to reels that us poor folk can slightly afford. So what happened is the Vanford FA, which is the second generation Vanford, it actually has a lot of Shimano Stella technology in it, apparently. It has the same gears as the Stella, which is pretty impressive. I mean, you're taking the gears out of a reel that's $1,200-$1,300 and putting them into a reel that's about $375-ish or $400-ish. Still an expensive reel, but definitely cool. Lots of, of the stuff that makes, Shimano reels so smooth and fluid. And apparently the drag is like 10 times better than the last generation. Just silky smooth. This is the ultimate finesse reel in that price category. Will I end up getting one in the future? Maybe. I'm not a huge finesse guy, so I usually end up getting the aluminum framed reels like the regular Stratic, but it looks fantastic. It's black. It's got a bunch of silver accents to it. It looks great.
It really reminds me of like a high end, I don't know, maybe like 90s, maybe like late 80s spinning reel. Like it looks new, don't get me wrong, but just like it's not full of that edginess and all those like random cutouts. Like the spool itself looks like pretty solid, but it has like two nice like white lines coming across it. It just looks very classic. That's what it looks classic.
Yeah.
But it at the same time does look still modern. But I do like the styling of it. I know it's not going to catch more fish as to how it looks, but it sure looks good in those photos. And you hold the bass and that reel beside it.
Kind of looks like a reel that Batman would use. I'm going to go through some of this stuff pretty fast. If you're into, higher end Shimano stuff, the Poison Adrenas are amazing rods. They're about $550 for most people, completely out of your price range. For me, I picked them up a few times. I almost bought one a few times, just never pulled the trigger on it.
For the last few years, like pocket change,
Yeah, clearly. The last few years, I've noticed though that they've been really hard to find, and it didn't even occur to me that they were just redesigning them. That's why they weren't making the old ones anymore. So the new one has a bunch of new features. They actually put a keeper on the rod. You just sometimes buy some of those high-end JDM rods and there's no hook keeper, and you're like, what the heck, man? You spend like $500-$600 on a rod and they give you this little stupid like elastic like hook keeper thing. It's like, come on.
I actually have a guy that actually me and Jesse have used him, and he'll tie on hook keepers for me. I had him put on a hook keeper on my carp rod because I didn't want the stupid little line clip.
Yeah.
So I'll get these like other rods that don't come with it, and I'll just have this guy for like $30 tying a hook keeper.
And it looks like
a
stock.
legit job.
Yeah. So I just thought that was funny that like this $550 rod, one of the main features that they pointed out when they're showing it off was that it has a hook keeper. It's like, slow clap, guys. Okay, cool.
Congratulations. All your low end rods have that.
Yeah. The Ugly Stick has that. I mean, seriously. Yeah. So there's a lot of soft plastic companies that had a lot of new products. I thought we could talk about Yamamoto. Yamamoto is a huge company, a lot of successful baits, probably some of the most successful soft plastic baits on the market. They have a bunch of cool baits coming out that look very cool. I've noticed the theme the last few years has been finesse. You notice that? Like a lot of these brands like Great Lakes Finesse and like all these baits, they're coming with these small little baits that are very popular on pressured clear water. And Yamamoto is doing the same thing. So they have a bunch of new baits. The one is called the Nuki Bug. Now it's basically a fat little, it's a craw bait, but the body just looks like a fat little piece of poop. It looks like a little
a punching craw almost, but it does have little leg appendages.
Yeah, it looks pretty cool. And the other one that looks really cool, and I'd actually want to try these, it's called the Covert Craw. It's a 2.5-inch little craw bait. It's got very fat pinchers and then little jiggly legs on the side. It's just like a little compact bait, but the body itself and the claws are very thick and dense. And it's actually made with like the floating material. So it actually will stand up on the bottom. Looks really good. They have a bunch of other cool baits coming out. Now, this is a bait that's not really new. We've been using 4-inch stick baits for a long time. Like one of our favorite baits is like a 4-inch Yum Dinger. Just that little slightly smaller size when the fish are a bit, just off a bit. Or if you're fishing for smallmouth, that 4-inch size is awesome. But Yamamoto's coming out with a 4-inch, they call it the Fat Senko. And it's actually really cool. So it's shorter, but it's thick. So it looks really good. And it's just that extra thick. You could pitch that like just like it's a regular 5-inch, even though it's shorter. Strike King. Strike King has an interesting bait coming out, and I thought I'd just talk about this one because we kind of talked about companies knocking off other companies. And I feel like people will be like, oh, that's a knockoff of this because it looks like this. It's like, dude, it's a minnow. what are the companies going to do? It's like, oh, you made this swim bait that looks like a minnow. You're copying this other brand that has a swim bait that looks like a minnow. It's like, dude, there's only so many things that fish eat, man. Like, what are you going to do? Have like an
You know what?
octopus?
They're all copying what all those minnows that were in the lake, anyways. Like
Yeah.
that lake that has that minnow in it, they're just ripping it off.
Yeah.
I say boycott all the soft plastic brands.
Yeah, exactly. So Strike King, they came out with, they call it the final copy. It is a harnessed swim bait, kind of like a mag draft, kind of like, the Berkeley call shad, kind of like 20 other swim baits on the market. It's basically a harness swim bait. Now, this one looks kind of unique because it apparently has more weight inside of it, so you can fish it deeper. So I'm just thinking in Ontario, oftentimes when I'm fishing a mag draft, they do fish kind of shallow. And when you add a lot of weight to them, sometimes it can affect the action. Now, this one was designed to fish deeper. So I feel like in a lot of lakes in Ontario where it's like, slightly clearer, you have to get a little bit deeper. For smallmouth, it comes in some smaller sizes too. This one might be something that you might want to check out because it does. That was the main thing that they were talking about, is this bait has more weight in it than a normal swim bait that size. So we'll fish a little bit deeper. Is it the best looking swim bait I've ever seen? No, it isn't, but it looks like a minnow. It'll catch fish. That's what fish eat, minnows. So now Andrew's going to talk to you about one of his favorite brands of all time. And if you guessed Z-Man, you are correct. So
Right.
Go ahead.
So Z-Man has a couple different things, a few different things this year that look really good. I'm going to talk about a couple. So there's the Tungsten Evo Chatterbait. So again, the Evo Chatterbait we have in stores now. They've been in stores this past year. But the Tungsten now, this is like the true competition for the Evergreen Jackhammer. And so to have the Tungsten Evo, it's going to be a better price range. And again, it has the same hook keeper and stuff on the Evo that we already tried, painted blades, all that good stuff that has become my favorite chatterbait. And now to have it in tungsten, I'm definitely going to pick up some of those to have that there. They do have a couple different sizes in the tungsten as well, as they should, as they always do with their different chatterbaits. But they also have a new trailer. Go ahead, Jesse.
I was going to say, even the jackhammer isn't tungsten. So I think a lot of people think that
they only have the tungsten edition.
So the evergreen jackhammer, it's like $25. That's not tungsten. So this is completely in a new category. I think you can get some that are JDM versions that are tungsten, but this is specifically tungsten, and I think it's like $16. So yeah,
that's awesome.
And I'd just like to add one thing about this. This is why this is going to be such a good lure. Fish learn certain vibrations and sounds. Mm-hmm. So you may think, they're showing them side by side, like, oh, this is tungsten, this is lead. Notice that the head is slightly different sizes. It's like, who cares? The fish isn't going to look at the head of a chatterbait as it whizzes by, and it's like, hey, that looks 30% smaller. Like, they don't care about that. But when that blade is whipping back and forth and hitting that tungsten head, tungsten's very hard and dense. It's going to be like clack, 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 like way, way louder and way more vibration than a regular chatterbait. So that's why it's going to be like, I think for the first year or so, lights out. Mm-hmm. So buy a bunch right away.
And like I was saying, with that hook keeper, the Evos, when they brought them out, and these tungsten ones as well, the hook keepers on there are designed for Z-Man plastics, for that elastomer or whatever stuff. And when you rig on your Z-Man, which is my favorite trailer, especially for chatterbaits because they'll often get nipped off, you have something that's not going to get pulled back on the hook. And I haven't had one slide back on me with zero super glue. Like, it's really nice, that hook keeper they have on there.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of trailers for them, Z-Man has also released the Chatter Shad. So it's a mix right between the Chatter Spike, which is my new favorite trailer they brought out last year, and the Razor Shad, which was my favorite trailer before the Chatter Spike. So this is awesome. And I'm really, really excited for it. The reason why it's different than your Razor Shad is because it has a chatterpike segments that go down to like almost nothing. So as it's on a trailer, that vibration of the chatterbait in front of it is just putting like all that action into the tail. It's that tail's moving around so wildly. The cool thing with this is they actually come in two different sizes. So the Chatter Spike I've only seen in the one size. I don't know if there is another one, I'm not sure. But I do know that the Chatter Shad is actually in two different sizes. So you can get it for the regular, the big blade, or your regular chatterbaits, or you can also get it now, it's a bit smaller, for the Mini Max or something like that, which is awesome. I'm so excited to have that super segmented trailer for those slightly smaller profile chatterbaits. So I'm going to pick up especially the smaller size of those.
that Mini Max with that little trailer on it, it looks absolutely
Yeah.
perfect for Ontario.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think of these new Shadtrons?
They're awesome. Like I believe they were designed like kind of like this in the saltwater design for it. A lot of the guys they are using them for bigger bass, but they now have like the 4.5 inch and stuff. Because I think they had them out, or is the Molotron I think they had before, which was the saltwater one. So
Yeah.
the Shadtron is on the freshwater version, and it looks good. It's got such a boot tail, like a thick tail.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see how it does fish in the water, like in person, to see how it actually runs. Because I know a lot of the time with Z-Man stuff, it's like it's so soft that the paddle tails don't have much kick. But the way these look to be designed, they have such a thick back end on this swim bait, they might have some like really good rolls. So I'm curious to see how they swim.
Yeah, it's actually a wedge tail. It's kind of like you've seen this in Savage Gear with their 3D trout and stuff. The wedge tail, it kind of just moves back and forth a bit, so it should have a lot. So these Shadtrons, it comes in two sizes, 4.5 inch and 6 inch, and it looks literally like a photo print shad with a wedge tail with a hook in the front. So it's basically you chuck it out, let it sink a bit, and then you reel it in. They look very real, and if they're just as stretchy as every other Z-Man, you should be able to catch more than a few fish on them. So this is one bait from Z-Man that I'm really excited about. It's the drop kicker drop shot bait.
Mm-hmm.
So Z-Man has a lot of like drop shot baits, but it seems like they haven't come out with any in a few years. They have their standard ones that they've had for a while, but this one looks really good. It looks like a little minnow with kind of a ribbed belly section, and then has a little like weird half circle like wedge tail in the back. And if you watch the videos online of this thing in the water, it looks very cool. This is going to be drop shot, Ned bait, any ball head jig, just any finesse presentation. You can pretty much put that on a hook or a jig head and catch fish. It comes in a ton of colors.
It looks cool a lot like, for profile wise, I think it's called the Trick Shots Z-Man. They have again has that same segmented belly, which just makes it even softer. Like I have some of those that I use, and it's kind of like a flat tail worm or paddle tail worm in the back, and it works really good. So this one, the drop kicker, yeah, it's going to be cool just to have that extra movement from that back end of the tail because of that big kicking back end on.
One bait that when I saw, I instantly thought of Andrew is Z-Man has a new bait coming out called the Big Ballers. Now, to describe this, not because of that, but Andrew always tells me about baits that have a ball tail. He's like, oh, it's got to have some cool vibration on the end. So this is basically like the regular, razor shad trailer, but instead of like a split tail in the back like a minnow, it just has a little ball on the tip of the tail. And the action on this, if you look at the videos, it's very unique. It doesn't have a huge like wag, but it has like a very cool like random vibration on the back. I feel like something like that, it's just different enough that it might get you bites in pressured water. I don't know.
I find with anything that has a ball tail on it, it's designed to have the most erratic tail movement. So again, like, it's not the whole bait, but the tail movement of it is going to be all over the place on a steady retrieve or whatnot. Because you think of like a paddle tail, they're always shaped where it's kind of directing the water down, and off the bottom, so it's going to push it to the side, and then there's too much force on that side, so it pushes it to the other side. Whereas a ball, as it moves up, it's got a 360 sphere in the back end that is going to pick up on any little difference of water coming past it, and you'll never be able to predict which direction it's heading next. So yeah, it moves around real quick, but it's very erratic, like in a small kind of more finesse kind of way.
Yeah, definitely. So I thought we could talk a little bit about Crush City. I know we talked about that last week on the podcast. So if you're not familiar with Crush City, it's Rapala's brand of soft plastics. And like we mentioned, Rapala is a monster company, probably one of the biggest, in the fishing industry of like companies that makes, bait tackle and, fishing lures and all that kind of stuff. Crush City is their soft plastic line. When they first came out, I was kind of skeptical. I'm like, it looks just like everything else. But then they started coming out with some really, just solid patterns. And just like, for instance, I'm very specific when I buy soft plastic swim baits. I, for years, found one that worked really good for me. It was the Storm Largo shad. It's just the right profile. It has a really good kick. The only problem was they were hard to find, and B, they didn't come in a lot of colors. Like it was like white, chartreuse, and like that's it. You might find some other random ones. They didn't even have green pumpkin. It was just like, what? So they came up with like, a swim bait that pretty much, Rapala does own Storm, so maybe there was some collab there, but they came up with their Mare Minnow, and I bought some of those. They come in every color. They're widely available at every store you go to, and they have the same awesome, super heavy kick on a swim jig. So I bought those first, and I tried them, and they were fantastic. So I bought a few other baits, and the other ones that I used as well have been fantastic. The colors are great. The durability is very good. A lot of them are made of like, elastic material. Some of them are, some of them aren't, depending what you get. They had a pretty good range of baits, but now they've actually released a bunch more. And the ones that caught my eye the most, and again, a lot of these are not new. Like it's a stick bait. You're going to be like, ooh, it's new and innovative. It's not, but it's their version of it. And if you're a Rapala fan, this might be something that interests you. So I thought it was funny. I always think it's funny the names that these companies come up with for, their bait. So I thought me and Andrew could do a little game here. And when it comes to Crush City, we're going to give their bait a rating from 1 to 5 on how it looks, and then 1 to 5 on the name that they picked. So we're going to talk first about the Crush City Pig Stick. Now, the Pig Stick is basically like a stick bait. Now, it has a bunch, like on a regular stick bait that has like an egg sac, the little segment in the middle. This one actually has multiple. And the reason for that is it's designed to be like a multi-use worm that you can you hook wacky, you can hook it a Neko rig in the, slightly down, you can hook it so many different ways. So there's different areas you can do it. And then these spaces in the middle actually fit perfectly one of those VMC crossover rings, which is also owned by Rapala, of course. So it's just basically a stick bait. So looking at this bait, I'd give it a 3 out of 5 for looks,
Yep.
And for the name, what would you give it?
I'd say it's a solid 4 out of 5. Like pig stick, like it's going to catch pigs. That's good. That's a good name.
It just sounds like someone that's using a pig stick, just like from Texas or something. Okay, let's go to the next one. So the next one is called
from Finland. Like, yoo-hoo, the pig stick.
The pig and stick. The next one is actually the hedgehog, which is a medium profile creature bait. Now, one thing that they didn't have in their lineup was a creature bait. And if you don't know what a creature bait is, like, the classic flipping baits that like a craw, it has just like little 2 craw appendages on this. Creature baits or like brush hog style baits, they just have everything on them. You have this like, worm sized body, 2 twister tails coming off the back, 2 flopping arms as well, 3 legs on each side, the little quivering arms. And then on the front, you also have 2 salamander arms. So it literally looks just like, you dropped a bunch of baits and they melted together and you picked it up. You're like, here it is. It's, but that style of bait is very popular, especially in the States. Mm-hmm. You think of like the Zoom brush hog, I think it is. It's just like a classic bait. This one is called the hedgehog. The bait itself, it's probably not something I would fish myself. It just, I don't know. I'd rather use something else, but I guarantee if I fished it, you would catch fish on it. It just looks super buggy. So
I really like soft plastics that have as many appendages as possible, and it looks like they just kept adding them to this one.
Yeah.
Like, will this catch fish? Yes. Double it.
I guarantee this, if it's on the bottom sitting there, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 different appendages coming off that thing. That thing is going to have a ton of action on the bottom, and it could help you catch more fish. So I'm going to give it, I'll give it a solid 3.5 out of 5 for the looks of the bait. And I'll give it a 2 out of 5 for a name. Hedgehog.
Hedgehog is an odd name. I was going to say like it's 1 out of 5, but it's almost like a 5 out of 5 for looks of the bait. I like things that look insane.
Your wife's like, wait a second.
The guy that designed this either got fired or got a raise. I don't know.
The next, the popular one that a lot of guys have been winning lots of money on is the Crush City Mooch Minnow. It is basically, it's a minnow bait that you put on a jig head, fish with forward-facing sonar, something that we don't do or talk about on this podcast because most people do not own, $7 million forward-facing sonars. But anyway, it's a good-looking minnow. It's got this weird, cool T-shaped tail. Apparently, the action on the tail is very, very, subtle, but also crazy at the same time. Looks pretty good. I could definitely see myself catching walleye and smallmouth on that, 100%. I
like baits that can kind of do multiple things. Like this is obviously going to be great on like a hover rig or a small jig head or drop shot even. But I really see this working well on a small like underspin, especially if you rig it upside down to see that flat back on it, and that's not going to get caught on that blade spinning underneath.
Yeah,
I think that would be another good like trailer for an underspin.
definitely. Yeah. And I think I was watching an article or a YouTube video about it was one of the Crush City Pro stuff. I forget which one it was. And they were saying that a lot of the baits they were trying to use are multi-purpose. So you have to carry less baits in your boat because it's like, oh, I use this bait on this swim jig and this bait on the back of a spinner bait. It's like, why don't you just get baits that work for multiple things so you can carry less bait? So like Andrew said, the Mooch Minnow and a bunch of these other baits, you can use them for many things. And I think the next one is the one that caught my eye the most. It's called the Janitor because it cleans up. That's cool. I give that a 5 out of 5.
That's a 5 out of 5 name.
Now, the Janitor is a finesse worm. It's actually very cool because it's actually like ribbed, which I always like on a worm. Helps with hooking too. But it's also designed, it has an egg sac in the middle with an indent where you can put that crossover ring for wacky rigging. You can Nico rig it. You can fish it like weightless on a free rig, anything like that. It's one of those worms. It's just like, it's a worm. It's a finesse worm. You can use it for anything. Like we've been fishing finesse worms for years. Many people have too. You can rig it on a million different things and catch fish on it. The patterns though look absolutely fantastic. And I do like the ribbed body. That's very cool. And the one I was talking about was the Mare. The Mare swim bait. It's a great bait. It actually has a really good kick to it. If you put this on a swim jig and reel it in, the whole swim jig is moving back and forth. It's a fantastic soft plastic. That's the one that got me onto the Crush City stuff. Again, you buy all kinds of brands of soft plastic baits, like from every brand, local made stuff, big brand stuff. This is one of my favorite swim baits now. It's great.
Definitely want to get some myself because this one here is 2.5 inches. So
That's
for
the
a
new
small,
one.
like to have a small paddle tail,
Yeah,
or a small swim bait, whatever you want to call it. I find that when I have small plastics like that, their body is usually too narrow. So when I try and put it on like a jig that has like let's say a lead hook keeper on it, it might be a small jig, but it just starts splitting the head of the plastic open. This one actually looks like it has like some beef to the actual body of the minnow. It's not super slender, so I really like that, and I'm excited to use that. I've got to pick some of these small ones up myself because that's one of the things I've been using more so after we were out fishing with that with Halliburton Fishing Guide up there, and what's his name again?
Brian.
Kyle. Brian. Why did I say Kyle? So I'm fishing with Brian, and seeing how effective he was with just like a little ball head jig and a little paddle tail behind it, like that's awesome. But I was having a hard time with the paddle tails I currently own to get one that worked well on a ball head jig or just a regular jig head. So this is something I'm definitely going to pick up.
Yeah, and again, this is the new size, 2.5 inch. They also have 3 inch and a 4 inch. The ones I have are 4 inch. 2.5 inch, like we said, we cleaned up, and then we did that walleye trip too, and we caught a bunch on the little 2.5 inch swim baits. So oftentimes these fish, they're keyed in on a certain size of minnow, especially early in the season when the minnows are small. You can chuck a bigger bait and you just won't catch anything. They're just keyed in on that small bait, and that's what they want, even the big fish. So definitely cool. And again, tons of these baits are available at everywhere. Like we're at Gagnon's, they have a whole wall of them. Go to Sale, they have a whole wall of them. Like they're everywhere. They're accessible. You can get them. They're a reasonable price. I like them. Anyway, so I thought we could just kind of blow through some of these quick. So with Rapala, I'm a big jerkbait fan. So is Andrew. The Maverick, which is their high-end jerkbait, it's actually fantastic. It looks amazing. They now have a deep diving one, which I've been waiting for. I've been waiting for the deep diving one. It actually has a really big lip on it. It's very wide too. Looks really good. They have this new topwater bait. What do you think of this one, Andrew? It's called the Rapala Jowler. It's almost like a evergreen shower blows kind of deal. It's like a pencil bait, like a walk the dog bait, but it has kind of like a very cupped, like clear plastic.
It's a bigger
almost
cup than the shower blows.
Yeah. So apparently this one sprays a lot of water. It has a long cast system and it has dual frequency knockers in it, which is cool. I know 13 Fishing had a bunch of baits with dual frequency. I know Rapala owns 13 Fishing now, or most of them anyway. So it's cool to see technology come over from different companies like, oh, this is cool. We're going to add this to our baits. So it looks really cool. We like topwater walk the dog baits.
I'm really excited because it has the long cast system. So putting in what we've had in jerkbaits for a number of years now into other things like topwaters. I know this isn't the first one to do it, but the price range on this is going to be a lot cheaper than some of the JDM stuff you're going to find that has long cast that is a nice topwater spook. And this one here is 5 inches long. It's 15/16 of an ounce, so it's almost a full ounce. This thing is gonna cast a mile, especially
Absolutely.
with that like long cast weight transfer in it. So I'm super excited to go to use that, because when I'm using a thing with 3 treble hooks, or if you want, you can probably upsize the hooks and eliminate the middle one if you wanted to. But it has 3 treble hooks on it from the package. That's going to be an awesome like smallmouth, big presentation, lots of these sticky sharp hooks, and casting it into open water on like big flats. You're going to cover so much water with this, like really effectively. So I'm excited for that one.
That thing's you're gonna be able to launch that into orbit. Yeah. It just reminds me of remember the old Rapala commercials? And they had the long cast fishing line. Remember they had
Yes.
Rapala finesse,
I like how they
Rapala
invented
tough.
long cast fishing line before they invented long cast lures.
Yeah. Remember that commercial though? And they're like long cast fishing line, and the guy casts, and the
Around
lure
the world.
flies around the world and hits him in the back of the head.
Yep.
Oh, that was the golden age of fishing commercials. So I thought we could cover right now some rods. So one of our favorite brands, me and Andrew, St. Croix,
Mm-hmm.
they actually have a really cool thing. I'm kind of skeptical, a little bit, but I am interested to see if this actually works. So if you had been following St. Croix for any amount of time, you saw that some of their musky rods they came out with, I think 2 years ago, a year ago, they had the handle underneath where instead of a trigger, it had almost like a gun handle. So when you grab the rod, you could actually have your hand and your wrist straight when you're holding it. And that is called the grasp handle. Now, I picked them up a few times. They seem like, especially for musky fishing and you're using big baits or you're like vertical jigging, it'd be very ergonomically comfortable. Yeah.
For ripping rubber and stuff, and suics even.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Suics are light, but it's still like you feel it in your wrist with that constant angle all day ripping your rod.
Or even just like pulling in big bucktails.
Yeah.
It'd be good. But the only problem was this technology or this feature on this rod was only available in the Legend Tournament Muskie series, which, they're $500 muskie rods plus, right? So now they've come up with this thing called Grasp 2. And now this is cool. My thing is, again, me and Andrew both work with tools for a living. And I always think
that you don't call your workmates that, but I mean, I agree. But
yeah. But usually what I find is things that are meant to be one piece, if they're designed to have multiple pieces, oftentimes they fail because it's supposed to be one piece. The more pieces there are, the more complicated it is, the more likely it is to break. I don't know. I've had people tell me when I showed this on our Instagram feed, and they're like, oh, that's going to break. I'm like, this is St. Croix, one of the biggest fishing rod companies in the world. I'm sure they did a little R&D on this and tested them out before they just put them on the market. Let's have a little bit of faith here in our buddies at St. Croix. Looks like a cool idea.
This handle, now does it attach? I'm trying to remember if I saw the video of it properly or not. Doesn't it attach similar to like how the reel mounts into the rod? Like there's kind of a screw to tighten it down, right? Like a ring.
So the cool thing with the Grasp 2 series, it's going to be coming in the Mojo Bass, which is redesigned, the Mojo Muskie, the Legend Tournament, and the Legend Tournament Muskie. So the cool thing about this is there's different kinds of handles on like a fishing rod. So if you want this big grasp handle, like the handle for your whole wrist and everything, that's cool. But for some techniques, it's not comfortable. It's not comfortable at all. So you may think, oh, that, I'd like to get a rod that's multi-purpose that does different things, but I don't want the grasp handle because for this technique, it's gonna suck. So what they did is they're making an interchangeable handle, which I think is that's innovative to me. Like that's cool. I haven't seen that before. So basically, when you unscrew the nut on your rod to put the reel on and off, when you unscrew that, you can actually remove the grasp handle and just put on a regular trigger finger, like the trigger handle, like for your fingers, right? So you can decide which one you want to have. Do you want to have the palming reel seat, or do you want the big honking grasp handle? So you can replace the one that you want for that day, and it literally only takes a few seconds to do. I've seen the guy do it. You just unscrew the thing with your reel in, you slide this thing in, it locks in place, you twist it on, and it's locked in. Is it secure? I'm sure it is to a certain extent.
Here's my reasoning on it. I think it's going to be completely fine. I may be wrong. I often am. But I think it's going to be completely fine because in my experience, I've seen maybe 3 videos of all the fishing content I've seen of someone's reel coming off their reel seat. And usually it's because of a major defect. It's not just, oh, it got loose and it just came off. So if it's attached in the same way as a reel does, like the amount of effort and exertion you're putting on those reels, like with the drag tight and it's pulling off the reel. Imagine all the times you've tightened down your drag and you have your thumb in your spool and you're yanking on your 60-pound Power Pro to try and get the snap on that like log that's snagged on, and your reel doesn't fall off your rod. So like
Yeah.
that kind of connection is secure. So I don't foresee a big issue with having these handles there. I am excited to try it.
Yeah, like I've never once been musky fishing and thought that my reel was going to snap off of my rod. Like I've seen it happen to guys over the years. Again, probably a defect or just a reel that's been abused to heck, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like you said, it's the same way that a reel goes on. So I feel like the handles would be cool. I'm really excited for that. I'm actually planning on getting another musky rod for next year. So I might have to look into the new Mojo series. The Mojo musky rods are being updated. That's why they're all on sale. A lot of the stores are having them for like 30% off for this year's model, but next year they're all going to have that new interchangeable handle, which is, I like that. That's cool. That was one thing in the show. I'd say for me, I would have made that best rod of show myself. One more rod series quick. We're going to go overtime on this episode for sure, but St. Croix actually has a new rod series called the Black Bass series. It's kind of a weird series for me because I just feel like I don't know where exactly it's supposed to fit, because I know they kind of like juggled the series, because the Mojo Basses used to cost like $175. Now they're like $240, and they pushed the Bass X's up into that $175 range. So the Black Bass series, 1-piece rods, 2-piece rods, 36 models, 5-year warranty. So it's made in Mexico. That's why it's a less expensive price, but it is SC3 graphite, which is the same as the Mojo Bass rods. So I feel like it's a very similar rod to the Mojo Bass. I don't know why it's coming out. It does have a different styling to it. It actually has black EVA handles, which a lot of people aren't a fan of, but a lot of people are. It looks very modern. This series is designed for bass fishermen, just like the Mojo Bass. They're very similar in price too. This is going to be a little cheaper. So I get it.
It's probably like a cheaper option because, again, like EVA, made in Mexico, I feel like it's just a more affordable version for someone who doesn't want to go that extra little bit to get the Mojo Bass. This is a great option.
The Mojo Basses are also made in Mexico, though. So, I mean, if it's the same graphite, it's SC3, same as the Mojo Bass. These are the same. There's no cork on the Mojo Bass. It actually has like a composite mixture. It's not even a full cork handles. So it's really just like a different styling, but the Mojos cost more. I don't know.
They're probably bringing Mojo Bass a new version next year. Something.
Yeah. So anyway, they look really nice. They look classy. If you like that rod that has the black EVA high density foam, I think they look fantastic. I'll definitely be checking them out. Maybe pick one up next year because I like trying new St. Croix rods, but they look really cool. Now I'm going to go through some of these pretty fast because we're coming up on an hour already. One of my favorite lures ever, I've done really good in Algonquin and in Ontario in general, is the Nishini Lure Works Erie 9.5. You know that little perch one I have, Andrew?
Yep.
For years, that thing only dives about 3 feet. It's a little tiny perch jerk bait. I mean, the color I have is perch, but it's a little jerk bait. It's got 2 treble hooks. Really cool bait. You know, the guy, Nishini, he lives in Ontario, designs all these really cool baits, amazing baits. And he finally came out with the Erie 9.5, which is the size I like, but the medium diver. It has a slightly bigger lip. It actually dives down to 7 feet. But the cool thing about this bait, this guy's like, all of his baits are just super thought out and cool. It actually has this it's called a fin cut tuning. So like under the diving lip, there's like this little vein, like a piece of plastic that comes down, and you can actually tune that to make the bait do different things. So if you turn it a certain way, it gives it a wild darting motion. But if you also turn it back, it goes to a tight wobble. So isn't that cool? So you could have one jerkbait that does 2 different things depending on the day. Oh, the fish are being finicky, you make the thing just have a tight wobble. And other times you're trying to get a reaction, you put it on like just a big wobble. That's cool. I definitely want to pick up one of those. So another cool one, Shimano SLX XT, second version. I have the first version. It's actually one of my favorite bait casting reels, under $250. I think they're like $189 in Canada. So the SLX XT, it's the one above the regular SLX. Great reels. It has the SVS Infinity, which is the tuning on the outside of the reel. So if you don't like opening the side plate all the time, it has just the dial on the side. I actually really like it. It's one of my favorite reels. It does everything. They updated it. It looks a little nicer. They give it silent tune, which is just like, it reduces spool vibration. It's not like the biggest upgrade of all time, but hey, it's something.
It's cool to see an improvement to the SLX because it is a good, like, pretty budget friendly reel, and the XT is fantastic. It casts really well.
I'll tell you, I have a ton of Corrados and Scorpions, I bought this SLX XT. I put it right up there with them. Like the quality and the performance of the reel for the money, it's amazing for 190 bucks. Really, really good reel. Highly recommend it. This next bait is a bait that I almost know Andrew's going to buy. What do you think?
So I went through some of the lists online and screenshotted a couple things.
Yeah.
I absolutely screenshotted this one. It's from Hedden, which is a classic bait manufacturer. Been around. Hedden had a couple things there this year. This one is new. It's a spinning image, and it's a plopper bait. It's people can say, oh, it's ripping off the whopper plopper and stuff. But the really cool thing about this one here is it's also designed to be a walking bait as well. So it's like a plopping bait that walks. It's the walking plopper.
Yeah. Because it's basically like the old one they had was called the spitting image, and it was a walking bait. Now they just added a prop on the back, so it still walks, which is awesome. Imagine just like plopping that along. You get to a log and just start walking it back and forth.
Oh,
another cool thing about this bait, did you notice the prop?
It's hard plastic.
But do you notice the opening on it? So there's actually an opening on the propeller. So when you reel it in, it creates a huge bubble trail and a completely different sound and a completely different vibration as it's plopping along the surface. So
I didn't even catch that. That is definitely now in the weird category, and I'm buying 7.
7, okay.
What's
another one?
Hedden, one of my favorite crankbaits of all time is the old classic Hedden crayfish. And what they've done this year is they've actually brought out some new colors essentially for it, and they're like nice matte colors. And everyone's talking about, matte is when we had Dan on from Great Lakes Finesse, he was explaining how that's one of the pros tips is they get that shine off those lures. Great Lakes Finesse, they come already matte finish on their baits, and that's like the deal apparently.
Yeah.
So for Rebel to come out with these awesome crayfish lures again, but with these updated colors that are like nice matte color, and the colors patterns look wicked.
They do
I am
look
very
really
excited
good.
to grab some of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, the old ones they still work. They haven't changed the body style. I'm so glad they didn't. That is such a good tried and true bait.
It is, yeah. Yeah. The color patterns are fantastic. They are eye catching. And again, one of the first lures I ever bought was a Rebel craw, just because Andrew was in love with them, so I had to buy one. That was actually probably one of the first 3 lures I ever bought. I still have the original. I won't fish it because it's very nostalgic for me, but they slam fish. Absolutely. Smallmouth, largemouth, pike, anything. But absolutely great lure. Speaking of Great Lakes Finesse, so many cool baits coming out. There was a lot of like stuff that he had when he first, put his stuff to the market, and it was all premium stuff. And there's a lot of like stuff that I was like, why doesn't he have this? It seems kind of weird, or like this maybe a bigger size. And then this year he just like released everything. I'm like, wow, that's literally like everything you could have wanted. So he's come out with
when we had him on, he was hinting there was a bunch more stuff coming this year. Like, he did not disappoint.
They were probably testing the stuff for like 2 years. Yeah. So everything that Dan comes out with, it's very innovative. It's not just stuff that you see in any other brand. It's well thought out. It's the highest quality. It's made in USA. It's great stuff. So he actually has this new bait. This is very cool. It's very unique. It's called the hover minnow. It's a little minnow you put on like a hover rig or like a little jig head. And the bottom actually is concave, so it catches water as it like darts down. It has a concave belly. And he has this technique that's called hover darting. And the action of this bait underwater, it's so unique. Very, very cool. Now, the juvie craw, we actually got our hands on some of those. I haven't had the opportunity to use them yet. I'm actually going up to Algonquin in a few weeks, and I'm definitely going to slay on this one like we're going to with some of those. So I'm excited to use those. Here's a bunch of new colors that came out. The drop minnow, which me and Andrew have had good success with on the underspins and on other techniques, actually has a bigger size now. So he had the 2.75 inch. Now he has a 3.25 inch. And he says it's not only longer, it's also fatter. So it is a bigger profile. And the one that I'm the most excited about is the matte finesse jig. So it's a really high quality hook. It's Gamakatsu. It's it's not like super thin wire. It's a beefier hook, but it's still really thin and sharp. It's got a matte head. He's got this special coating on the head, so you can actually bang it into rocks and it won't chip the paint off as easy. And it's wire tied. It's a little skirted jig, and it's actually designed perfectly for one of his little snack craws. So his little snack craws they have that are amazing little craw baits, this thing is going to be killer. I'm hoping that I can find some of these before I go to Algonquin, because there's one lake that I'm really excited to try just a little finesse jigs on. So I'm excited for that. Why don't you talk about some of this X Zone stuff? This looks sick.
I was actually going to mention just before you get started was again, it's line. You might not think it's too exciting, but Sunline is brought out a sinking braid, which I am super pumped about, because braid floats learned about in like episode 3 of the podcast.
Yeah.
But sinking braid is going to be awesome, because then it just helps for those super finicky or finesse situations. You have something that's going to have better contact to your bait, especially in deeper water with a smaller jig head and whatnot. So having sinking braid would be pretty cool. But,
actually,
go ahead.
I was going to say, in this braid, I was looking at some of the poundage. It's mostly the more finesse sizes. So they don't have like 50 or 65 pound. It's mostly like 8 to I think 20 pound. So it's like a finesse line. So you have like direct connection to like your drop shot and stuff. I would be excited to try that myself for like finesse stuff, because you ever notice your like braid does like, it slowly sinks down as you're fishing if it has some weight on it or it floats. So it would be cool to actually have a line that does sink down a bit faster. And I've noticed a few line companies have been coming out with that, which is something I've noticed a lot of people have kind of been asking for many years. So it's good that companies are finally listening. So this X-Zone stuff is blowing my mind, though. Looks so good.
It does. And especially the first thing on your list here is the 2¼ inch stealth scented tube. And they also have the little like stealth tube jig heads as well, designed for these things. But it's just like, it's such a small presentation, but it's different color. On this one here, you got like green pumpkin with like white tendrils coming off the backside. But I've seen crappie tubes before. These are thicker. Like these are like thick tubes, but they're short. And I absolutely love that, because the crappie tubes I've had really good success with on finesse finicky bites. But these are fantastic because you can still have a fair sized jig head, again, shorter shank hook, but you can have some decent sized weight inside of this thing to still fish that water more effectively.
I think too, because like I remember talking to Dan from Great Lake Finesse. He was saying that like they were looking for finesse baits, and there's all kinds of like stuff for panfish, but it's not designed for catching big fish. So with Great Lake Finesse stuff and like these new X-Zone stealth baits here, they're bass sized baits, but they're small. Like they're designed for big fish. They're designed to hold big hooks, like not big hooks, but bigger than crappie hooks.
Here in this photo is like a legit hook.
Yeah, they're designed to catch big bass. Yet they're small. They're compact, but they're not like tiny. So that's cool. I thought that the scented stealth creature is 2 3/4 inch. That thing looks pretty cool. It's like a creature bait, like the Rapala hedgehog almost, but it's small. I could see using that as an Ed bait, or like on a little finesse Carolina rig, or just finesse like flipping even. That looks pretty cool. All these baits, they just look so good.
The stealth craw is similar in profile to that. It's just has the actual claws, but again, it's very detailed. And again, like that thing looks wicked. And their minnow too, it's fantastic. Such a long whip-like tail in the back of that thing. Yeah, like half that bait length almost is that little tail coming off. So it's going to have awesome movement for like drop shotting and anything like that.
This stealth series from X-Zone is going to be, if you're an Ontario angler or someone who fishes like pressured clear water, these are going to be like amazing to get. So we're going to go quick through some of these reels and some of the last products we're talking about, just because we're going to go a bit over time. But one product we kind of hinted about last week was the new Daiwa Tatula SV reels. Now, again, you notice at the store sometimes when it's hard to find something, you're like, why is it never in stock? It's probably because they're, redesigning it and they're not making any old ones. But one of our favorite reels is the Daiwa Tatula SV TW103. They are one of the best casting reels, or the SV series from the Tatulas in general. They almost don't backlash. They're very hard to backlash. I'd put them right up there with a DC Shimano reel. They're fantastic. They're a little bit outdated. I think the old ones were probably like 7 years old. So much needed updating. The design, they look great. They have the SVTW100, and they also have a 150 size, which is new, which is great.
The 150 is awesome. I definitely want to get one of those just for, again, a little bigger spool, bigger handle. It's just to be able to handle a little bit bigger of a bait. So it's fantastic for what I want to use for bass fishing, for casting some of those swim baits and whatnot. It's going to be a fantastic reel for. But I also want the SV TW100 has like the hyperdriving boost, so it's like casts even further than the old Tatula. Like
Yeah.
that's gonna be good. So I really want one of both.
And that's definitely, again, trickle down because the boost spool was only in their high-end Steez reels, and then they dropped it down to the Zillion. And you're like, oh, they dropped it down to the Zillion. The Zillion's a $500 reel. So now you can buy one of these for like, in the mid 200s-ish, maybe probably pushing up to more of a $300 reel. Not cheap. I know a lot of people can't afford that. Fantastic reel if you can save up and afford it. But these
For
things
that price
with
point, amazing.
you're getting a reel that feels like it's $500 for 250 to 300. They cast amazing. They almost don't backlash. They're one of the highest rated skipping reels because they don't backlash. They're great. I'm really looking at getting a 150 just for like frogging and skipping. It's going to be amazing. Now this next one is something that Andrew probably is kicking himself for not buying or waiting for.
I just got a Rebellion as a BFS rod, which I don't regret. The rod is awesome. It's just what I wanted. Just like those loons, just what I wanted. But
Throwback.
they they just released the Tatula XT BFS rods. Like, well, I don't regret getting the Rebellion. It just means I have to spend like $100. These are a great price point for BFS. A lot of the stuff you're getting, if you're going like actual true BFS, a lot of the real finesse baits, like hard baits, they can be pricey. The reels themselves, get a good proper BFS reel, they can be pricey. So to have a nice, well-built rod designed for for those techniques, that's a 6'5" light action. It's going to be awesome for fishing these kind of like Americanized BFS, not ultra light stuff, but fishing finesse presentations, absolutely. So again, around around $100 or so, depending on
that's
America
US. So I think they're 120 Canadian. But we have some of the XT Tatula rods. They're fantastic rods. The bass rods are $120. They're great rods. I've recommended those to so many people. I was like, just if you're looking to spend $75-$80 on a rod, save up a few more bucks. Get the XT. It's a fantastic rod. They're crisp. They're light. They handle everything. I have one rod. It's a 7-1 medium light. I use it for bass fishing, drop shotting, walleye fishing. It's just like a multi-purpose rod. They're great. I'd say it's one of the hardest rods to beat in my opinion for value, for a performance value rod. Anyway, so another cool line coming out. It's called Suffix Revolve, and it's a line that I think Andrew should try because it is actually, this is how they describe it. It's an ultra thin finesse braided line. They call it a micro braid, and the reason that you'd want to use this, apparently, they say that you get less wind knots. You always get those wind knots when you're casting in the wind with braid, and the line just kind of creates a knot. And when you reel it in, there's a big loop in the knot, and you're like, ah. So apparently this line is so thin, somehow, using magic, it doesn't get wind knots. And it's apparently way thinner than a regular braid. I don't know how much this is going to cost. It's probably going to be a little more than a regular braid, but it's a very ultra thin braid. It's going to be fantastic for finesse fishing. It only comes in smaller pounds too.
Yeah, I feel like it has to be super smooth too. And that would help reduce the possibility of wind knots because there's less for it to kind of catch on itself. But if it's a micro braid, if it's braiding thinner than ever and tighter with more weaves, then it's going to inevitably be a bit smoother. Yeah. So I am excited to try it, especially on some of my BFS reels, just because then I can have, maybe a little bit more line without sacrificing the weight, and have just get that startup on that spool even better.
Definitely. And I saw, speaking of BFS, Andrew's talking about that. If you're into Abu Garcia, I know Andrew's a big Abu fan, so they actually are coming out with a Revo X. Now the Revo X series, it's a budget reel. Like I think the Revo X series is like, I don't even quote me on this, but they're less than $150. They're around that price point. And what Abu Garcia is doing is they actually had some designs, like there's different regions, like Abu Garcia North America, Abu Garcia Japan. Like there's different reels that maybe they make in Japan or Europe that you'll never see here in North America. But what they did is they actually had designed a nice BFS reel in Japan. And what they did is they trickled down and used some of those plans to make a Revo X BFS reel. So it's a budget BFS reel. It looks fantastic. The spool is like super light, super shallow. Not sure on the pricing of this. They didn't mention it, but I'm hoping that it'll be under $200 Canadian. And if you're into Abu Garcia, you want to try, being a weirdo like Andrew and getting a BFS combo, then that is definitely going to be a reel that you should definitely check out because it's a budget BFS reel. So there's two more things, and I know Andrew wants to talk about the rat.
Yeah, I really really want one of these. I have seen them in stores. It's the Evergreen Combat. So it's a little bit smaller than the other rats that the previous rat, which was like a musky size. But the combat rat is a nice. I think it's what 5 inches or 6 inches long.
Yeah,
and it's an amazing wake bait. The color patterns they have on these are fantastic. But this thing, it has like these super loud knocking things in it, and I'm getting into more wake baits, and I have a real soft spot for minnow or rodent imitating baits. So this one to have that long soft tail, but a full like hard body without the extra appendages you have to buy and snap on when the legs get bit off is going to be fantastic. But that is one that I really got to kind of dig into my pocketbook and grab because it's a weird bait. I think will catch me a giant.
Yeah, they are very cool. They have a special hinge, so basically, when the thing is waking on the surface, it actually like clacks the sides clack together like very aggressively.
Apparently,
it looks
it's very
cool.
loud.
Yeah. Now they're about $70. I did see them at Ganyan Sports. They're not cheap. Again, Evergreen is a Japanese brand. Bougie, super high end hooks, very well designed bait. Is it worth $70 to buy a topwater lure that you might catch the biggest bass of all time on? It might be for you. It might not be. So, again, the value of something is subjective to the person that is buying it. So Andrew might buy this rat bait and, it might be well worth the $70 to him and he might have it for years and catch a big fish on it. I might buy it, cast it and snap it off on the first cast. So we'll see. Now, the last thing I thought I'd mention again is another sinking braid from one of my favorite braids that I use is Daiwa braid. I just found that it's really good value for the money. They have the Daiwa X braid sinking. It's the SS112 8 carrier, so it's 8 strands weaved together, and that is available in 8 to 30 pound. And I'm guessing because it's Daiwa, and a lot of the stores like Sale and Gagnon's and like all the other places, they all carry Daiwa braid. It might be more readily available than some of the other ones. So that is maybe something that I'm going to try. So I'm hoping by the end of this episode, you're not going to be too far in debt by planning to buy a lot of these things. Again, we probably covered about 10% of the, not even 5% of the stuff at ICAST. There was so much stuff.
I have to mention one more thing, and I know Jesse's going to get mad for going so over time, but American Bait Works brought out the Zoo Wake, which is under soft plastic topwater. They released a couple last year under the Snagproof brand. But this one here it's like a softwater frog, but it has a paddle tail built into it. So it's like, that's one thing, again, a little different, looks weird. I'm excited to use it.
I saw a video of it being used. That actually is a very cool action. Very cool. Yeah. Again, you could literally go through and buy like all this stuff if you like tackle and just try it out. But again, you don't need all this stuff. It's just cool. Some of the stuff that maybe we talked about, you're like, man, I've been waiting for something like that. I'm going to check that out. I highly recommend going on YouTube and just type in, ICAST 2024. And there's so many videos out there of people that were at the event just showing off all the different stuff, clothing, batteries, boating stuff, electronics. They even came out with a trolling motor for a kayak that has over 100 foot-pounds, 100 pounds of thrust. Yeah, they're like, we're going to hit 10 miles an hour. I was like, dude, my boat doesn't even do that with a gas motor. So there's lots of cool stuff coming out. But anyway, that was a cool episode. Again, like we mentioned last week, we wanted to do that last year, but last year ICAST was terrible. Like the stuff that came out, I was not impressed with at all. This year, I was more impressed with a bunch of the stuff. And again, there's so much more stuff out there that you can check out. So we'd like to thank you for, getting to this far of the episode. We would like to thank again our Patreon members for sure for donating a few bucks a month to help cover the show costs as well. And we would like to read one review very quick because we said we would. This is a review from Donnie. This is on Apple Podcasts. He says, 5 stars, 5 out of 5. Imagine that. 5 out of 10. Just kidding. 5 out of 5. Extremely well produced podcast that doesn't disappoint. Thank you very much. Refreshing. He says, refreshing to be presented fact-based methods instead of fishing lore. Unless you literally listen to the fishing lore episodes. I agree with that. He says, its evidence topics are spoken to with years of experience and plenty of research. New anglers can shorten their learning curve through subscribing to this podcast. Even experienced tournament anglers will find something to take away. So I'd like to thank Donnie for that review. We really appreciate it. If you have not left us a review yet, please do so. I have a lot of people every week, they'll send messages on our Instagram or our Facebook and they'll say, guys, I love your podcast. I just found it. It's amazing. And I say, that's great. Please write us a review. So if you haven't done that, please do it. And we will read it if it's a cool review. Make it funny and I'll read it. That one wasn't really funny. That was more like, oh, that was cool. But make it funny and we'll read it. So anyway, we are going to end this episode with, as tradition states, we have the quote of the week. And to handle that, the man with the mustache and the beard.
Well, if you really gotten this far in the episode, just have to realize everything we talked about, you can't cast. I can cast.
Boo.